All right, we'll go ahead and make a start of it. We're missing a couple of folks, but maybe they'll come in here once we get started. So welcome to our third of 4 sessions during Lent here, and we'll be looking at chapters 31 through 34 of Genesis this morning. But before we do that, why don't we start with a word of prayer. God, we give you thanks for the chance to gather together and study your word this morning. We ask your presence to be among us as we discuss, have conversations, as we reflect on the actions recorded years ago by those who are faithful to you. We give thanks for the chance to do this, and we give thanks for your presence with us as well. Open our hearts and minds to the word you have for us today. It's in Jesus' name that we pray. Amen. All right. Well, once again, a lot going on in these few chapters, if you had the chance to read through them. So I'll start with the last time I had a note at the beginning of which parts of the reading the lectionary picks up on, which usually in turn means which parts are we more familiar with because they tend to probably be preached on or come up, at least, read during worship. And so for this whole bit, which probably if you grew up going to junior church or similar things, probably know the outline of this part of the story pretty well. But the only section that's included in the lectionary is in chapter 32. It's verses 3 to 31, and it's basically the account of Jacob wrestling on the edge of the Jabbok River. So I mean that one,
Where he gets his new name, isn't it?
Yeah, no, the name comes.
Oh, sorry.
Is that the? No, the name comes later, I think.
I thought the.
Maybe it does. See, now I gotta look at my notes. No, you're right, name change there, yep. So, so that is, so just something to think about though, that all of this other stuff, some for reasons we can probably imagine, and others, for whatever reason, are sort of left out of that cycle. But I suppose unless we adopted the Jewish custom and covered, 2 to 6 chapters a week, you wouldn't have any volunteers to get up and read the scripture in the morning, I think, if we... It might shorten the sermon time, though, so maybe that's good. So anyway, we'll start in chapter 31. And so this is the beginning of this sort of story arc. Jacob has decided to leave Laban and go his own way. And so the chapter starts with with God speaking to Jacob, and sort of echoes the promises that God made to Jacob back when he had his dream in Bethel with the Jacob's ladder dream. And what's a little interesting, I think, about this is it kind of recounts. He goes out to talk to Rachel and Leah about his plans to leave. And he explains to them this whole scheme that we kind of ended up with last time about how he's grown his flocks and how he's increased his wealth and his value and all these sorts of things. And in chapter 30, when there's the explanation of how Jacob's doing this, there's really no indication that that it's something that comes from God. It's Jacob's own cunning, and he knows how to manipulate the breeding habits, and he knows how to, manage his herds, and that's what grows these flocks. But in chapter 31, he explains to his wives that, this is all on account of God, and God has, blessed him in these ways and has increased his flocks and all that sort of thing. So it's a slightly different story to what we started with. And so I bring it up for a couple of reasons. Again, as we watch, we've talked about the different streams of influence as far as compiling and editing these stories, and they move back and forth. So there's a bit of a shift then between chapters 30 and 31. In chapter 31, so starting around verse 11 or so, when Jacob's explaining this to the women, the divine communication to men through dreams is a hallmark of the Elohist authorship or editorship. So it's another tool that scholars use. We don't pick up on that so much in reading in translation, but it's one of the two tools that scholars use when they make these assumptions about when certain passages were written and why they might be included. So just bring that up to kind of keep that in the forefront a little bit. So in verse 15, actually starting in verse 14, we get Rachel and Leah replying to Jacob's plans to leave and his explanations for how he has sort of secured their wealth and so forth. In particular, it's interesting in verse 15 in the NIV, which is what we have, the set of Bibles we have here. It's Rachel and Leah talking about Laban. Does he not regard us as foreigners? In other translations, and specifically in a more literal translation from the Hebrew, that comment probably should be read as that they consider themselves to have been sold, that it's more of a transactional nature. So let's think about that. Why would they have? They're not happy with Laban. Do they have a gripe about being sold? You think?
Quite liked all the presents at the start, didn't they?
Yeah. I mean, they certainly were. They literally were giving his wages for Jacob. Yeah.
They wouldn't have had any of Laban's inheritance anyway, would they? Women didn't inherit.
Well,
if they had brothers.
Yeah. So they wouldn't necessarily have had inheritance. But what I wonder about is if they view themselves as having been sold, certainly it says something about their relationship to Laban and probably contributes to their willingness to go along with this plan of Jacob's. What does it say about their relationship to Jacob, do you think?
Sorry, whose relation?
The women, Rachel and Leah.
They could have loved him.
Yeah,
They could have really,
yeah,
liked him.
yeah.
And they know he's probably going to take the children are going to go with him anyway, even if they decide.
Well, I suppose that's true. I suppose that's true. I wonder how much choice they really had.
Women didn't seem to have a lot of choice about much, didn't they?
No.
Jacob seems to be on the up, and Laban's flocks aren't doing so well.
That's right.
Because Laban's,
That's right. So they decide to make the move, and they pick an opportune time. We know from the end of the previous chapter that it talks about how Laban, when Laban and Jacob make the deal that Jacob's going to take care of the spotted flocks and Laban's going to keep the solid colored ones, that Laban takes all of his flocks and moves 3 days distance from Jacob, so there's no funny business going on. So we can assume that there's some distance between them. And it's sheep shearing time. And Laban and his men are out shearing the sheep, which, as you can probably imagine, prior to electric clippers and such, this was a very labor-intensive process. They would have had large flocks that they needed to take care of. And the tradition at the time would have usually, once that, however many days it might take them to go through and shear all the sheep, then there's a big feast at the end to celebrate all of the work. So this is a really opportune time for Jacob and his family to sort of slip out the back, because all of Laban's attention is focused on, this hard work and then the big feast at the end. So they prepare to go, and what is the odd thing that Rachel chooses to take with her?
The household gods.
The household gods.
Yes.
Yeah. Which I think raises a couple of questions.
Yeah.
One is,
Inheritance.
why does Laban have gods?
Well, it's goods.
no, it's gone.
Oh,
Yeah. Yeah.
oh dear, new glasses.
So why does Laban have
She's
gods?
a little schemer, isn't she, this girl?
And why does Rachel want them?
Yeah.
It could either be statues and worth a lot, or
Mhm.
they could.
It's sort of like a hostage.
You think?
So if Laban does come after them, she would say, right, I'll knock the head off your god,
Well,
or
could be,
ask money for it.
could be.
That's a revelation.
But
Explain what it's all about.
Change
She
your
doesn't
votes.
tell
But when- but when-
she
Yeah.
doesn't tell her husband, she does it on the quiet.
yes,
It's just her little scheme.
yeah.
But then she had little schemes earlier on, didn't she? Things.
Well, very, very interesting. So there's really is no evidence in this story that Rachel has necessarily become a strict monotheist because of her marriage to Jacob. You know, that sort of thing and that sort of connection with God kind of seems tenuous through here. It kind of comes and goes. And certainly Jacob has this connection.
She had you no bets then? Just in case Jacob's God lets them down, she's got this other one in the
Well.
corner.
Could be. Or she still is devoted to him, you know. But thinking that Rachel is doing this, and we've talked already, I mean, Rachel and Leah come from the same family that Rebecca came from. And we think about Rebecca's actions in the previous section, in how she kind of manipulated things, and there really isn't any evidence that Rebecca was maybe totally on board with this God that Isaac, you know, was devoted to. Maybe it's more of a family trait of some sort, who knows? But anyway, she steals the household gods and packs them away. So then we get to verse 20. And we see that Laban is sort of acquired a new name now. He's Laban the Aramaean. And so he's, up to this point, he's just been Laban, the uncle or cousin or, whatever his relationship was to Jacob. So this really kind of is not just marking that there's this separation that's taken place, but the Aramaeans, certainly later on when the Hebrews were kind of more organized as a nation, the Aramaeans certainly would have been Gentiles. So this is very much a signal to the readers, generations hence.
These are the baddies.
This is the bad guy.
The ones with the black hats.
Yeah. And so any encounter between Laban and Jacob really becomes an encounter, at least symbolically, between these two nations, sort of a thing.
Would their language have been Aramaic then, which is what Jesus spoke?
We were talking about language earlier. I'll have to do some reading on that and see, because this still would have been, this is still, 1,500 years before Jesus. So if it was, it probably would be maybe the same as someone speaking Old English to us.
Would have
There-
evolved.
Could be some similarities, but it wouldn't be the same language perhaps. But I'll do some reading on that, because like I said, that's already, we were talking about that before we started this morning, so. So they take off. Laban finds out about it a few days later and talks about how Laban pursues them for 7 days and catches up with them in Gilead. So I passed the maps out. You can take a look at your map, and Haran doesn't even make the map, but it's up in that sort of top right corner area. They've come south into the hill country of Gilead. Gilead is about 300 miles from Haran. So it's impressive to think that Jacob's group could cover that in 10 days. That'd be a pretty ambitious volume of travel. But then Laban is said to cover it in 7 days, which if he just went with a small sort of raiding party that wasn't carrying all of their possessions and belongings, they could probably move.
The sheep.
Didn't have the shit, that's right, yeah, could move much more quickly. And so they catch up with Jacob, and there's the encounter between Jacob and Laban. So they go back and forth, and part of it is that Laban accuses Jacob of stealing his gods. Verse 30. Now you've gone off because you long to return to your father's household. Like, that's okay, that's understandable. But why would you steal my gods? He asks. And Jacob doesn't know anything about it. The other interesting thing that I found about that verse in the language is the word in the manuscripts that is used here for gods is Elohai, which means, has the connotation of, these are real gods. There's another sort of pejorative term that's used in other places where it's talking about false gods. That is teraphim, which sort of suggests, they're gods, but they're not really gods. So it would seem that Laban that these are, it's not just, oh, I'm upset because they're worth some money. It's, you took my gods with you. So what happens next? How are they protected?
Well, Rachel's sitting on them,
Yeah,
and she has a good reason to sit down.
she sits on them. Yeah, has a good reason to do so.
What are those little minks? What are little minks?
Yes.
Well, so too, is it a bit satirical?
I've had this at school when girls want to go, when the girls wanted to go to the toilet. The same reason. It may be true, maybe not.
Yeah. Well,
I just wanted to go out anyway.
so is the act of sitting on the gods, is that maybe a little satirical comment by a monotheistic author or editor later on? Rachel kind of assumes this really irreverent kind of posture towards them.
You can imagine the rabbi sort of chuckling while they were reading this out.
Yeah. But then what's interesting is, that's the end of it. Laban can't find him. Eventually he leaves. And that seems to be the end of it. But anyway, certainly was worth recording for whatever reason, perhaps just for the dig at other gods that, I think it's also worth interesting, or well, I'll get to that in a minute. So Laban and Jacob kind of make a pact, basically setting up almost like an international boundary. You're not gonna go north of here, I'm not gonna come south of there, you stay out of my business, I'll stay out of yours,
Yep.
sort of a thing. So that's taking place. We were talking earlier, they erect a pillar, kind of like the one that Jacob put up at Bethel after he had his dream, which again probably would have had the terms of their agreement on it and been a marker of where they could go and where they couldn't go. But then they also have a make sure I'm doing the right thing here. Yeah, they also took stones and piled them in a heap. So you would imagine that's like a little cairn or something of that nature, but just interesting that they had both, both markers. In verse 53, so this is Laban sort of giving his farewell quasi-blessing. He says, "May the God of Abraham and the God of Nahor, the God of their father, judge between us." So we know who the God of Abraham is. Nahor was Abraham's brother. So it seems to suggest that the God of Abraham is also the God of Nahor. But it's just very interesting how it's sort of broken out that way. I wonder, this is me wondering, if it's sort of setting apart the different branches of the family. If Laban sees his inheritance through Nahor, and Jacob sees his inheritance through Abraham, if that also informs the fact that he had these other gods, and that Rachel had some reason to want to take them with her. And it also interestingly says, the God of Abraham, the God of Nahor, the God of their father. So Abraham and Nahor's father. If you remember way back when we were talking about the beginning of the Abraham story, there's really no indication prior to Abraham that there's any concept of this sort of monotheistic God. That God kind of appears to Abraham and says, this is how it is. So Abraham's father, not only would it have been unusual that he would have had faith in the God of Abraham, but the tradition around Abraham's father is that he made idols. That's the story in the Midrash about Abraham as a youngster comes in and smashes all the idols. Did I tell that story? The story in the Midrash is explaining sort of why Abraham had this revelation of the true God, is that Abraham's father had a shop where he sold idols, where he sold little gods. He crafted them and made them. And Abraham had, as a youngster, had approached him and said, well, these aren't real. And his father was like, oh, no, this is going to hurt business if you say that too loud. These are real. And so that night, Abraham sneaks in the shop with his baseball bat or whatever and destroys all the idols. And his father discovers it the next morning and has a fit about it. And Abraham says, well, if they were real, they could fix themselves, or something to that effect. And so it's part of the tradition. It's not a story that's biblical necessarily, but for generations, that's been the tradition around Abraham's father, is that he was an idol maker. So anyway, so that's Laban's sort of pledge, sort of oath, I should say. And then in the next paragraph, Jacob takes an oath. And he takes an oath in the name of the fear of his father Isaac. Doesn't say anything about God, or the God of Isaac, or the God of Abraham. But his oath is on the name of his father. The word that's translated as fear here is unclear what exactly it means.
It's capitalised as well, isn't it?
Yeah. So, I think the implication is he's taking an oath on the God of his father Isaac. But the term he uses is not the same term that, for example, Laban has used immediately before them. And that expression, the fear of his father Isaac, or anything similar to that, apparently only appears in this one verse. And so I think that's why there's a little confusion over what exactly that means.
Same verse 42 as well.
Yeah, he repeats it. Oh, 42, yeah, he's used it already. Yeah.
I like the fact that they all had dinner together before they separated.
Well, so part of that would be because when you made a truce or a compact with an enemy, that's how you sealed the covenant, is you ate together. So it has a nice family implication to it as well in this case, but that probably had more of that reasoning behind it. Okay, so they've taken care of Laban and are moving on their own. So if you look at the map, then they are moving south. And the next series of events and encounters sort of happen close together there in the center of the page. Jacob knows he's going to have to encounter, let me back up. At the very beginning of chapter 32, a real brief reference to the angels of God meeting Jacob on his way. And so he gives that place where he had that vision or encounter, Mahanaim, I think, is the name that he gives that. So that's in verse 2. Doesn't really say if they had a message for him, or maybe it was just affirmation he was doing the right thing. But he knows he's going to have to encounter Esau. And he knows that Esau lives in the land of Seir, in Edom. So he sends some of his men down to meet Esau, and I think sort of trying to soften him up a little bit. He obviously is very concerned about how this reunion's going to go. And he's obviously still afraid of Esau. So in these next couple of chapters, this interaction with Esau, there's a couple of things to kind of watch for. First of all, we talked earlier about the oracle that Rebecca receives about her 2 children, and the younger will rule over the older, and that sort of thing. But in these 2 chapters, Jacob repeatedly portrays himself as Esau's servant. If you watch any of the messages he sends, or even when he actually is encountering Esau, he
Keeps bowing to.
yeah, he keeps bowing to him. So part of that's probably self-defense, but it's just interesting that it also contradicts in a physical representation that the words of that oracle. The other thing to watch as Jacob starts taking preparations for this encounter is the way the concept of twins or duality continues to surface in this story. He divides everything up into 2 camps to protect one in case Esau comes for the other. Obviously, going back in the story, they have they're twins, but they're struggling over the blessing of their father. There's 2 sisters that struggle over a husband's love, or at least his fertility, as we saw in the last section. His scheme was 2 flocks divided into multicolored and unicolored animals, and again, he divides his possessions between 2 different camps. So there's a lot of this reiteration of this sort of duality.
It's not that kind of neighbour, really, doesn't it?
Yeah, there's echoes of that. Yeah.
Whenever there's dispute between brothers, they're not just brothers, they're usually twins.
Yeah. So when when things start to pick up, he gets word that Esau's on his way. How does Esau present himself? How does Esau approach this? What's he coming with? This would be verse.
Well, he ran to meet Jacob.
No, this is
Chapter 33, isn't it?
I'm still in 32.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
and then the rest we got the
Fight for them.
Yeah, no, we'll get there. Unless I made this note in the wrong place.
400 men.
400 men. Yeah. What verse is that, Heather?
6. Verse 6.
Okay. Yes. Yeah. So Esau's coming with 400 men. So 400 men was a standard number for a regiment or a raiding party. So obviously that's a sign to Jacob that this might not turn out very well. And obviously Jacob as the schemer that he is, can't envision any other way to get back to the homeland without encountering Esau, even though Esau doesn't live there. So he knows he has to have this encounter. So he sends everybody away, and then starting in verse 23, we get to the story of Jacob wrestling with God. So this continues. Jacob's whole story can really be sort of set in the terminology of wrestling, right? I mean, he's grabbing a heel coming out of the womb. He and Esau sort of fighting for birthright and then later the blessing. I mean, that's, not a physical wrestling, but obviously they're going back and forth. His multiple run-ins with Laban. Yeah, I mean, it could fit in with the professional wrestling circuit, the whole story and the characters. Maybe that's how we should have settled it. That would have been an interesting way to think of it. So he has this encounter by the Jabbok River. What do you think of when you read that story, say between verse 22 and the end of the chapter there? What does it mean? Or maybe what's happening even?
We don't know who this man was, do we?
Well, the outcome is that we presume he's God, though, don't we? Never actually said that. It's just always the man. But
Jacob
gets a new name, is that?
Jacob.
Is that the significant bit at the very end?
Well, certainly that's the bit that, well, we'll talk about the name in a minute. The only bit
It's not
here.
like the dream we had with the angels going up and down, is it?
No,
Must
no.
be sinister.
Well, it's a much more physical encounter. It doesn't say that he's dreaming. I mean, this is seemingly actually happening. The really only implication that it's God is sort of in verse 28, the man said, "Your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and with humans and have overcome."
I was not saying that's that particular struggle. But
Well, that's it. That's it. It's, there aren't other humans there. So is it referring to that particular physical struggle was with God, or just he's struggled with God generally? He's obviously struggled with other people.
Jacob eating too much cheese before he went to sleep. It's a nightmare, isn't it? You woke up and then you wake up because you feel hit, but actually you've fallen out of bed instead. But something like that,
Well, so it's interesting. A couple of the different commentaries I read about this talked about that there are some folkloric aspects to this story, specifically that the man or God or whoever it is that is doing the wrestling with Jacob, they kind of, neither one prevails necessarily, but they get to the point that the man says, "It's almost daybreak, let me go." Now, where else do we hear of creatures that need to leave before the sun comes up? I mean, that turns up in a lot of different sort of folk stories. And so that bit would suggest that, well, this maybe certainly wouldn't have been God himself, likely not an angel. I mean, they seem to have no problem showing up at different times of the day. When they start, the man asks Jacob what his name is, which is an odd question if it's God. Some of the scholars I read suggest that they would say that this man be thought of as some sort of like a demon, like a devilish character. but then the outcome doesn't really seem to have sort of the same characteristics of what we've seen in Garden of Eden and some of those other stories. The Midrash, talking about the Midrash again, the Jewish tradition, teaches that it's the spirit of Esau that he's wrestling with.
Oh, just the thought of meeting him is enough
Yeah,
to...
yeah, yeah.
He must be really scared.
The man refuses to identify himself, so that's, doesn't help either. And one of the commentaries I read suggested that could this be Jacob's dark night of the soul, sort of a thing, where he's overcome with his fear and anxiety about what tomorrow's going to be when he has to encounter Esau and face all these. Maybe he's regretting what he's done in the past, or maybe he's remembers the time Esau beat the crap out of him and he's worried about that happening again, or,
So when it's daylight, there's nothing more he can do about it. Whatever's going to happen is going to happen.
yeah,
So that's because it ends.
yeah, yeah,
It says, I saw God face to face, and yet my life was spared.
yeah. Well, and that's what the man says to him, is that you've struggled with God. So was that, so I think that's kind of part of what we have to wrestle with, no pun intended, is, how do we understand this story? Is this actually God wrestling with Jacob? Because the blessing of the name is kind of imprecise. And then Jacob kind of repeats that and says, like you said, Sonia, it's because I saw God face to face and yet my life was spared. He obviously thinks it was probably God. So in the whole process, the way that the man escapes Jacob is he touches his hip and he lets him go, but it results in Jacob having a limp. So I think there's a couple of things. One is at the very end of the passage, you get that sort of explanation that that's why we don't eat these certain parts of the animal. But at the same time, I think there's some symbolic stuff going on. The name Jacob, if you remember, means one who acts crookedly. And so now he's physically crooked instead of,
They're all a bit of a chicken, don't they?
yeah. The other thing that's interesting is, I wrote down verse 33 and there's not a verse 33. Let's see. Oh, I think what I was I think my note was, in this translation it says, therefore, this is verse 32, therefore to this day the Israelites do not eat the tendon attached to the socket of the hip. And so it's translated Israelites there. Some other translations have children of Israel. And that's the first time that phrase appears in the Bible. So it's the first time the name Israel has appeared at the same time.
And it also sort of like breaks the fourth wall of all this
Yes.
Genesis stuff. Suddenly, we're into the now.
Yes,
It's almost like
someone
the
explaining
wall has
back
come
in.
across the bottom of the screen.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think the other thing to think about is when the name change here, he's given the name Israel. And, we'll see that come up now and again. Well, we'll see it come up a lot, obviously the name Israel, but specifically Jacob's name changing to Israel. Think back to when Abram became Abraham. From that point on, he's Abraham. So, but if you watch, Jacob becomes Israel But I mean, the first verse in chapter 33, it's Jacob.
Jacob,
Mm.
yeah.
And,
In the song you played last week, the very first line is about
yes,
Jacob, also known as
yes,
Israel, you know, just trying to explain.
yeah.
It
So-
needs some explanation every time.
Yeah, so it's interesting because, and we'll kind of follow that through to the end of Genesis, but sometimes he's referred to as Israel, but most of the time he's referred to as Jacob.
Mhm.
It's not to do whether he's doing good things or dodgy things, is it?
I
Good
don't
Jacob,
know.
bad Jacob.
We'll watch for that as we go through, see if the name changes when he's doing good or otherwise, yeah. So anyway, chapter 33, again, he divides all of his possessions up. This is really the encounter with Esau. As he approaches Esau, he bows 7 times. And the significance of that is that would have been apparently common at that time. As you approached a monarch, that would have been the common court practice. Was, you bowed 7 times as you gradually got closer to them. In verse 4, they embrace. Esau ran to meet Jacob and embraced him. He threw his arms around his neck and kissed him, and they wept.
It sounds like the parable of the prodigal son, doesn't it?
Well, there's,
Was Jesus quoting this?
Well,
No, that's not.
yeah. There is some different manuscripts, and I think this is the challenge as we find older and older versions of the scriptures, is that it is not clear or not consistent that both of them wept. That some of them, the usage suggests that Esau wept, Jacob did not. And if you notice throughout this, particularly in verse 9, Esau refers to Jacob as brother. Jacob only refers to Esau as
My lord.
my lord.
So,
Yeah, very formal and sort of distant. Let's see, verse 11. They kind of have one of these encounters that reminds me of Abraham buying the cave to bury Sarah in. To take this, oh no, I couldn't, you take this.
Oh, okay then.
Yeah, it's a very, very interesting back and forth. And in verse 11, is Jacob.
In 10 it says, looking like and seeing the face of God. And that takes us back, doesn't it, to the Penile
yes,
thing.
for
which
see your
means the
face is like,
of
yeah,
God, apparently.
yes.
Sorry,
No, that's a good pickup. Yeah, he obviously would have had that on his mind. Does that suggest that Esau was
the way
the,
this is set out, it looks like it's the following day, but presumably it's not. But after the wrestling,
well, I
at
mean,
daybreak, and it says, and then he looked up and saw Esau. But did it?
well, I mean, I
did
think,
it happen that soon?
I think that's the implication, is that it happens right after that. So if he says, seeing your face is like seeing the face of God, does that maybe tell us that it was some form of Esau is who he was wrestling with? Yeah,
Or is the wrestling an actual physical event, or is it just something that
that's it,
was in Jacob's mind?
yeah. Yeah,
Well, it was physical enough to hurt his ankle.
Well,
Sorry,
I don't know, but
Yeah, but he could have just just fallen over and wanted to say, I didn't really fall over.
One gets the feeling.
I fell off the bed or
If
something.
you'd never just touch him and dislocate his hip,
Yeah,
he was much stronger anyway, that person was
Well-
against, you know.
certainly had powers that Jacob did.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, and because the word that's translated as touch, he touched his hip, touched the socket of Jacob's hip. That word, the original Hebrew word, has the inference of like barely touched, like brushed, or, you know, I mean, there's kind of
Somewhat
that.
like magic.
He didn't whack it, he, you know,
Yeah.
yeah, so definitely some other kind of power that was working there.
Made him limp though, didn't
Yeah, yeah. So in verse 11, chapter 33 again, verse 11, right after the reference to Esau being like the face of God, our translation says, "Please accept the present that was brought for you, for God has been gracious to me, and I have all that I need." That can be translated as "take my blessing," which again has implications for this story of Jacob stealing the blessing. So it's kind of ambiguous as to Jacob. Did he weep? Was it just Esau? Esau says brother, and Jacob says my Lord. There's all this back and forth, and then Jacob promises to come visit Esau in Seir.
They don't start the argument up about when they deceived their father and one got the blessing, the other didn't. And,
Yeah,
not mentioning, I mean, most families, you would kick off again, wouldn't it?
well, so is that down to, so I think the question to think about is, I mean, what is the dynamic here? Is Esau coming with forgiveness and mercy and, oh, it's just good to see you, and, you know, bygones be bygones? I mean, it's the implication is Esau has money. He has some kind of power. He's, you know, he came out okay in that way.
He's moved on.
Yes.
Jacob's still feeling guilty.
And got a limp.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Now, what challenges that, though, is at the very end of this, they're going back and forth on going to Esau, going to Seir, and Esau says, "Oh, I'll leave some of my men with you." And Jacob's like, "Oh, we're slow, it'll take too long, blah, blah, blah." So I don't know what the answer to this is, but does Esau still not trust Jacob? So he's going to leave some of his men to make sure that nothing funny happens. Does Jacob not trust Esau? And he's like, "I don't want any of your men around."
Does he still know about the other group?
Well, I mean, it talks about all of the wives and the children all come and are introduced to him.
Yeah. but
So at least they're together. I don't know if the other, I don't know. That's not particularly clear as
Because
to,
Jacob's always, in his mind, Jacob's always got that as a sort of backup, hasn't he?
well, that's true. That is true.
He knows if he retreats, there's some other.
Yeah,
Yeah,
maybe just get back the animals.
yeah. So if you look on your map again, so down at the bottom, way to the south is Seir, where Esau lives. And what direction of travel does Jacob take? He turns north and west and
Crosses the Jordan.
yeah. So
So is that is that where Canaan is supposed to be? That side, west of the Jordan?
Yeah, yes, yeah, yeah.
It just seems Jacob got no intention of going to where Esau lived anyway.
Say again?
It seems that Jacob had got no intention of going down to Edom anyway.
Well, I think that's probably it, yeah, yeah. Yeah, maybe he just says that thinking, oh,
Yeah.
you know, okay, I survived, take off, I'm out of here. But I think it gives us a sense, though, of what that, we know Jacob's character for certain. We haven't seen Esau in a number of years. But I mean, I don't know that we can necessarily associate with Jacob, but I mean, I think if we read it kind of from his perspective, you can see sort of the neurosis around what this relationship is, and you know, he obviously he doesn't trust Esau. He would have, I wouldn't think he'd go in the opposite direction if it were a genuine, you know.
It's Esau who shouldn't trust Jacob. Jacob dressed up as Esau.
Yeah, yeah,
Stole
well,
the
exactly.
and all that. I mean,
But is that, do you think that's because sometimes people who, tend to take advantage of other people, or any other quality, then sort of project that onto other people? Does that make any sense? Does he assume Esau
Like him.
is like him? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, he says he's happy to see me, but he's just trying to figure out how he can get back at me for what happened 30 years ago, or what, you know, whatever the time difference was.
revenge is a dish eaten cold.
Yes, yeah, yeah,
Fascinating.
They
Yeah.
don't trust, it just seems they don't trust each other, full stop.
well,
Also, that change of direction is handy because it puts him in the right place for the next little story.
well, yes,
If he's actually identified where it takes place,
yes,
it's got to get there somehow.
that's true, that is true. So, we'll tackle that last story here. We're running, I've got all kinds of notes, there were a lot going on here, let's see.
It's another funny
So-
one, isn't it?
So chapter 34, again, is sort of a story out of, seemingly a bit out of sequence with everything else. The story arc's kind of been following this whole thing with Jacob and Esau for a while, and now we have this issue with Dinah, who suddenly reappears. She's not introduced to Esau. If you'll notice that in the last chapter, the sons are all presented to Esau. Doesn't say anything about the daughter. So Dinah is, that we're aware of, the one daughter of Jacob.
That's
Um,
named, that's named, anyway.
It's named, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Simeon's brother, isn't
Yes. So this is Leah's daughter, Dinah. So long story short, she's apparently out and about with the other women. They're living in Shechem. Sorry, let me rephrase that. Shechem's the character.
It's also the place.
It's also a place, that's right, that's right. Yep.
Shechemites of the.
Yep. Catch up where I'm at. Okay, so Shechem is the son of the, sort of the tribal chief of that area, Hamor. And Shechem has a crush on Dinah and essentially rapes her. And so just a little background, again, this is a translation issue, but the way that Dinah and Shechem are described in the original Hebrew would suggest they were both probably adolescents at the time. So these are younger children. So what, I guess as you were reading this, what kind of stood out to you? Why is this story in there? What does it, what do we learn from this that helps to, if you haven't had a chance to read it, Jacob's sons get really upset about what's happened. They go and make a deal. Hamor comes out and says, give us Dinah's hand in marriage, and you marry our women, and we'll marry your, and everything will be great. And they say, well, yes, we can do it on one condition, and that is that you and all of your men become circumcised like we are, and then, that's fine. And so they wait till they've all had the procedure done and can't do anything about it, and they come in and kill all of them.
As you do.
As you do. So, amazing, this is not an electionary.
Preaching about it. Didn't learn this at Sunday school. No.
Yeah. But what do we think? What kind of stands out in that? Or let me ask it this way: what does Jacob do?
He's not happy about it. Because
He's not happy because they've made trouble.
Yes. Yeah. Is that?
Right near the end,
Yeah.
about verse 30, right near the end.
Yeah.
Simeon and Levi.
Yeah. You brought trouble on me by making me obnoxious to the Canaanites and the Perizzites, the people living in this land. Does he?
Nobody gets angry with Shechem, do they?
he's dead.
Yeah, he's dead. Well, the sons do,
The sons do, but Jacob
but
doesn't.
Jacob doesn't seem to.
Worry.
Jacob doesn't really show up till the end of the
Did
story.
he know about it? Was all this done without him knowing?
Oh, he knew.
And he's got to sort of patch it up with the older ones.
No, it says in verse 5 that he knew. Jacob knew about it and he didn't do anything about it. He waited for his
Yeah.
sons to come
Yeah.
back.
Yeah,
And then it's verse 11. You've got the deal taking place.
that's right. He was present at the negotiation for the bride
Yeah.
price. Yes. Yeah, but it's kind of unclear beyond that if
You
he
thought the
was,
Shechemites were pretty thick going, falling for this, or at least
well,
all having it done at the same time.
well, so I think it sort of would implied that Jacob was probably in his entourage, probably had wealth or had something that the Shechemites wanted. They
Women.
wanted to marry into that.
Plenty of women.
Well, yeah, but, yeah, it's just an interesting.
There's a Roman story similar to this, isn't there? The Roman Sabine women or something like that.
Well, there's also biblical stories this really parallels the story of David. So King David had a daughter, Tamar. Tamar was raped by her brother Amnon. Amnon was the oldest, stood to inherit from David. Amnon had pursued Tamar, was interested in her, raped her when she turned down his approaches, he then refused to marry her, which would have been the expected due course.
This is his half-sister.
Yes, and so she fled to Absalom, who was another one of David's sons. During all this, David really didn't do anything. And so eventually Absalom murders Amnon to avenge Tamar. And eventually he tries to overthrow David and is defeated. So there are some parallels with that story. I mean, the Greek mythology as well.
I think it's the Romans.
Or Roman, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
They invited them all to a feast and whatever. Then got the room slipped out to town.
Yeah,
And because the population was full, they had so many losses
yes,
in their wars.
yes.
But maybe this was a sort of thing like that. Maybe the Shechemites had lost a lot.
Yeah, I mean, it could be,
Lots of people
it could be.
divorced, a lot of young men.
I think the main thing to take away from this is it's a bit of a turning in the story, that Jacob's power is sort of receding, and his sons have now kind of assumed that mantle. Because it's, regardless of how much Jacob knew or was involved in this, it certainly is, it's the sons that are driving this action and who take this.
Is the fact that he's just start going blind, is it him? Or was that his brother, his father? Doesn't say Jacob.
No,
He was blind, does it?
Yeah, you think of, yeah, Isaac was blind.
A symbol of losing power.
Yeah. And so what happens after this, where we'll move next is, so Jacob kind of returns home. So he's gonna be around for a while in the story, but I mean, his predominance, he's kind of more of a background, going forward. And maybe it shows some weakness that he was more concerned about his reputation and in keeping the peace with the people who lived around him than what the fate of his daughter had been.
The brother's excuse is a bit lame too, isn't it, in a way? Because they're saying it's just about their sister. Why did they slaughter so many? They didn't all ravage her sister.
Well, maybe that's what you did back then, I don't know.
Well, it's coming in hard.
Yeah,
Sounds a bit modern, that.
yeah. Right, okay, well, that was a lot and
You haven't got a
not the
song
most
about-
uplifting.
You haven't got a song about chapter 434?
I don't have a song about chapter 34, 35. I did bring a song, and I thought maybe this would give us some reassurance, both in, some of this that we've read about today, but also in some of the things that we see going on around us, that perhaps we have some of the same sorts of questions about morality and decency and ethical thought as well. So this is a version based on a couple of Psalms. It's called God is Holding Your Life. It's by Richard Ruxfort Colligan. And yeah.